Welcome to the Fantasy Formula One podcast. I'm Paul. That's Ben. Thank you for joining our conversation.
That was awful.
It is a conversation we would be having anyway. So feel free to hit us up on all the social medias at Fantasy Formula One Podcast. And you can also email us at info@fantasyformula1podcast.com. And today we're talking about the upcoming race in Japan.
Yeah, that's the thing about F1. Even though we didn't have a race last week, there's always a lot to talk about.
For sure.
So Japan this year. So that's the Suzuka International Racing Course. It was originally built in 1962, and it's been home to several different racing forums. But the F1 Grand Prix has been there. It has been an F1 Grand Prix site there. Sorry, since 1987, and it's been more or less every year. I think with the exception of 2018 or 2019.
I knew one of those years in the last 5 or 6 something there wasn't a race there, and I'm not sure why, but it doesn't matter.
But the circuit length is 5.8 kilometers. So for those of you everywhere but the U.S., that's a little over 3 miles. That's 53 laps. So total race distance is 307 kilometers.
Okay.
And quick question. Do you know who holds the lap record for Suzuka?
I do not. Are they still racing?
Still an active F1 racer.
I just go with Lewis Hamilton. Oh, no, wait. Fernando Alonso.
You were correct.
It was Hamilton?
Got to trust your gut, man. It was Lewis Hamilton, 2019.
No kidding.
1 minute and 30.983 seconds.
Okay.
Now, there might be some of you purists out there who are like, no, just because during one of the free practices,
Sebastian Vettel?
Yes.
Yeah.
He actually clocked in at 1 minute and 27 seconds. But that doesn't count towards the actual official race time because it was a free practice.
And this is something I wasn't aware of. So, excuse me, in free practice, those lap times don't count for
not as a lap record.
It has to be in qualifying or in a race.
Correct.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So please know that we are aware of the asterisk there, and so don't come at me. Otherwise, though, just common sense stuff.
Yeah.
So the circuit length is 5.8 kilometers. So about just under 3.5 miles.
Yeah.
They drive that in a minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, plus or minus a few seconds, but that's so wild. And again, it's not a straight course. This course has 18 turns. Section 1 is you got probably your biggest straightaway.
Okay.
And then that breaks into a series of S curves.
Okay.
So a lot of weaving in and out. That turns into section 2 that has some pretty harsh, very sharp turns. A lot of potential for throwing yourself into a wall there. And then sector 3 brings you back around. But one thing that's cool about Suzuka is it actually has a crossover. So there's the first section has an overpass.
Oh,
and then you go back underneath.
Oh, that's sick.
It's really cool. It's technically in a figure 8 shape, but it's like if you had so if any of you listeners have kids, there comes that point where they learn to actually write letters and numbers.
Yeah.
But it's really sloppy. And there's that season of life where they are still sloppy, but they're trying to draw fancy.
Yeah.
And so it's like a sloppy kid writing a fancy 8.
Gotcha.
Because it's got all these random squiggles in it. But it's super cool. It's got some very Mario Kart vibes to the layout.
Okay.
And I had a train of thought and it was going full speed, and then I totally lost it.
Real quick.
Okay. I've got it now. So it's famous for having this crossover. I know it's not the only track in F1 to have a crossover, but there was it was originally built in 1962, and there was this Dutch guy who designed it, John Hugenholtz.
Okay.
Hugenholtz. When he was doing his original designs, there were actually 3 planned crossovers throughout the course. So the thing, it's already a crazy track.
Yeah.
But it was going to be much, much, much more insane.
I wonder why didn't they do all those crossovers,
I don't know.
That'd be interesting, but probably, hey, do one's enough.
Sure. No, it's still super cool that, but anyway, what is your familiarity with Suzuka in terms of years past when you've done?
Very, very minimal, because in the years past I was just the standard driver, the standard F1 fantasy player of, I'm just going to do like one race is as good as another. Any given Sunday, anybody can win. So when it comes to chips, when it comes to your team, don't worry about micromanaging it too much.
Sure.
And I'm getting a little bit away from that. A couple like surface level factors that I think are really applicable for the F1 is the whole debate whether high downforce versus low downforce tracks. And I know I've heard it. I know we've talked about it specifically offline.
Yeah.
And what that debate is about is like it has to do with how long the straightaways are and how long you're at full throttle. Because as soon as this track is spread out, then what matters what matters more could be my car's pure horsepower and my ability to get all the speed down the track.
Yeah.
And then in the turns, I go ahead and lose time in the turns, but I make that up in the straightaways. A high downforce is one that has smaller straightaways but more turns. And what that does is, well, yeah, you might not have a high enough top end on the straightaways, but they're so short you don't get to that high speed anyway. But then what you do is you have your car configured to give you more downforce, so in the turns you can go faster. And when you watch the F1.com analytics, sometimes they'll show up and they'll be like, yeah, like, and last year I think it was like, okay, well, this driver is the fastest in all the straightaways. This other driver is fastest in all the turns.
Gotcha.
And that's because they're a higher downforce or more low downforce or a more engine-driven car. For this track, it's like 65-70% of it is considered a full throttle time.
Yeah, there are two.
You're the stats man, so
there are two very healthy straightaways here.
Okay.
I'll give you a little visual if you want to take a look at this.
Sure. But yeah, so there's two healthy. I see what you're saying. Oh yeah, and like that curve right there at turn 15, it looks like it's a curve, but you can be pretty much.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, you can be
yeah,
absolutely. So this is one. The layout here is ideal for a McLaren car.
Yeah.
If you got Mercedes anywhere on your team, if you've listened to previous episodes, I think we've fairly warned you to probably think about steering clear.
Yep.
Especially this week. They are having a hard time maintaining high speeds in straightaways, and this is where they're getting overtaken.
Exactly.
And there will be plenty of opportunity for that this week.
Yeah, this isn't 2000 or 2019 when Lewis Hamilton and his Mercedes was the fastest thing alive. Like that, those days are gone. But so if this track is 65% wide open, it does lead to maybe being considered more of a less downforce and a more just engine speed car.
Yeah.
Track. However, then as soon as you have that, then you have more braking for the turns. So then you have your turns will be a place where the slower cars or whatever, or not slower, but the bottom 10 cars can actually catch up and pass. That lends it to that lends it to not so much a top drivers will just leave everyone behind. Maybe they will, but there'll be plenty of places for overtaking in the straights and when people bottleneck in the turns. Another thing is the pit stop. So last year, everybody ran a 2 pit stop strategy.
Okay.
In general, the more pit stops you have, the more chances for things to go wrong. The more the strategy gets into it, where which tires you use, how much a pace car, not pace car, but a safety car can impact the outcome of the race. So your lesser tiered, your second tier drivers, your bottom 10 drivers, their value increases for the higher number of pit stop races.
Oh, I gotcha.
And so this has 2, which is about average.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something to at least kind of take into consideration. If you're like, man, like with me last week, I was like, now I'll just leave Logan Sargent off. I'd rather have a void than have him in there. For this week, I might not make that same choice because since there's definitely 2 pit stops at least, will be more if there's a safety car, those are more seams for the bottom 10 drivers to get into the top 10.
Gotcha.
Because as soon as you have somebody like your Ferraris or your Aston Martins who need to make these pit stops, naturally, well, then as soon as I'm a Haas and I want to undercut or I want to get into pits first and then get out or have a faster pit time or somebody shears off a lug nut on their car, well, now suddenly that pit stop puts somebody out of the race.
Yep.
And so the more pit stops, the better for the lower tier in general.
Gotcha. Sounds good. And then backtracking a little bit, it was 2007 and 2008. They did not race at Suzuka, and then 2020 and 2021 were also gapped years. So they've been racing there since 2022.
Okay.
And this is the latest break.
And I actually, as you were saying that, I glanced at my website that I'm visiting, and it says this is considered a high downforce track.
Okay.
But now this is the first time I've seen where that's actually listed in stone, because normally, I don't know, you guys let me know out there in listener land what you think, but whether it's high downforce or low downforce seems to be pretty subjective. It seems to be more, well, what do you think is it? Like, and the talking heads, ourselves included, will say a lot about high downforce versus low downforce, but it's not, it's all relational. It's not like is it high downforce or low downforce? Check the box. It's nothing that simple. So this says it's high downforce with a 66% full throttle. That to me seems weird, but I would need to something we can analyze for next week after the race.
Yeah.
As to, because there's some high downforce teams or low downforce teams. I'm still trying to get my head wrapped around it. What other stats do you have for this race or numbers?
That's all I've really got stat wise. So this is the home race for our lone Japanese racer Yuki Tsunoda.
Mr. Tsunoda there.
Unfortunately, I don't think he's ever finished in the points.
See,
all right, actually, you know what? I need to look back, but I know last year he did not.
And how about this? Yuki has had from a fantasy standpoint, he had -1, and I have these off the top of my head because of how much faith I've put into Yuki. But he's -1 the first two races, and then he got +11 the second time, which is good. But he got +11 on races when Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton were not factors.
Right.
So I am a huge proponent. I think it's a good idea to keep track of which drivers are going to their homeland races, because that generally does mean they'll do better. But to your point, I don't think, based on Yuki's performance now, I'm not saying he's not going to do well in the race. I generally think he will.
And that's the problem. He's got the potential to do great things.
Yeah.
It's just the lack of consistency makes him really hard to back him, So that the noise was not one of disgust. It was just I realize 11 points is a great thing when you're talking that mid to lower tier driver.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Again is the difference maker. Again, 11 points. You said in the last episode you lost your league by 12 points total.
12 points. Yep.
But every point absolutely counts. But when you go -1, 11. Yeah, you're net positive, but I don't know how I feel about you, so.
On the races, like when we're racing in Italy or when Ferraris has their home field advantage, then that is something to really take into account, because they, at least in my memory, they do very well at their home race.
Oh, cool.
But with Yuki, I don't. I think the first part of the season's been rocky enough for Baby RB and for Yuki Tsunoda that I wouldn't. If you have him on your team, absolutely keep him on your team. Like, he's not suspect right now. I'd call him prospect. But I don't think it's necessarily worth changing around your team philosophy. Yeah, just to get Yuki Tsunoda on your team for Japan.
No, I gotcha. And so I'm actually looking forward to next week after the race when we kind of introduce our suspect or prospect segment, where we go just down the roster, and as of this week, how do we feel about each of these guys? So it's going to be that'll be a good talk. I'm looking forward to it.
And to fill everybody else in on it, and I got this from my wife who coaches softball, that in athletics, you have you view your players, not all the time, but whether they're suspect or prospect. And the idea behind that is, if I'm playing baseball and I go to the plate and I knock one out of the park, if I'm a prospect mentality, if people have a prospect mentality toward me, then they say, oh, wow, look how good he is. We knew he would do great things. Paul's a guy for you. If I go up and hit the ball out of the park, but I'm viewed at as a suspect mentality, it's like, oh, sure, he hit one out of the park now, but they had the wind on his side and the pitcher's arm is tired. Don't worry about that good thing he did. He is still not a good player. And we, as fans, especially of sports, we fall into that very, very fast. We see it in politics a lot, but we see it in athletics even as much so, where it's like, is Red Bull... Red Bull had a brake issue last week. Are they prospect or suspect? Well, if you look online, you have a lot of people, man, what's going on with Red Bull? How come they're doing this? No, they just had a mechanical failure. They are still, for me, prospect because they had a mechanical failure. Right. That's fine. Baby RB is suspect because they haven't made those advances that we were expecting Kick Sauber, I would say.
And that's exactly it. You know, in any forum where there's a high level emotion and the potential or the liability of recency bias.
Yep. That's a good point. Yeah.
It's you know, there's that knee jerk reaction of, oh man, but the prospect or suspect element of it is how immune is a given driver to that recency bias.
Yeah, that's a very good way to put it.
So to your point, I feel better about Max Verstappen DNFing 1 week than I do about either driver from Kick Sauber suddenly taking the podium.
Exactly.
You know, I'm going to stick with Max.
Yep.
More than I'm gonna take Zogan Yu or mullet guy.
Bottas
again.
Right.
Love the mullet, but
dude, he's leaning hard into it on social media.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
It's brilliant. But again, I'm not gonna jump him onto my team.
Exactly.
And I'm not gonna drop Max. So
yes, very much so.
Because you've got a consistent track record. You've got you've got an established performer that when something goes wrong, I'm much less likely to think that it's him, versus when you've got a very spotty performer that when something goes right, I'm going to say, well, what circumstances led to their doing well, as opposed to, well, it's just pure talent. So.
And a good example of this. So if you look at Mercedes and we look at Ferrari, and you're the one who was telling the numbers earlier, Ferrari hasn't won a championship in decades. The last time Ferrari,
in years.
Years.
We'll
okay,
say
we won't say decades. We'll say years. But in my memory, like Ferrari has won a handful of races, but for the last 10 years, it's been Lewis Hamilton, it's been Max Verstappen.
Yeah.
So when does Ferrari go from, at some point, they went from prospect to win a championship to suspect. But if you talk to the Ferrari faithful, no, Ferrari has a chance to win every year. They just don't.
Yeah.
So like the Ferrari team following, their prospect night and day and night, doesn't matter how many times they DNF, the Ferrari faithful are going to be there for their team. With Mercedes, that dropped off recently.
Well, and that's exactly it. That's what's so unique about F1 too about F1 as well is the match or mismatch of racer capability and platform potential. You know, you look at the beginning of last year. You got Lando Norris getting itchy, you know, because like he's a great driver, but he's hampered by the limitations of McLaren until halfway through the season. All of a sudden, he's like, oh wait, no, I love me some McLaren.
Yeah,
you know, and you look at Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champion.
Yep,
he's still Lewis Hamilton.
Sure,
but there's something off about the car. So Lewis Hamilton himself, is not suspect.
No.
Now,
absolutely not.
When we go down the list, though, will he be on my suspect list? Because he is driving
exactly.
that Mercedes.
And I'm pretty sure if you were to take Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez out of their cars, put any other driver in the field within reason into a Red Bull, they would suddenly jump 5 grid spots.
Oh man, can you imagine how much Nico Hülkenberg would
God.
kill to have a chance to be in the Red Bull car? He'd like, I finally get a podium,
right?
After my entire career. Nico Hülkenberg. So, side note, Nico Hülkenberg, man. I was reading up a little bit on each of the drivers. And I don't have the career stat specifics, but man, I feel like he's the guy from. Did you ever watch that show Suits?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Where there comes that moment where here you have this brilliant kid who's got the photographic memory and the go get him attitude. He can be a great lawyer, but it's around like season 3 or 4 where he has to realize I'm never going to be the hotshot lawyer because in order for my scam to keep paying off, I have to stay in the shadows.
Yeah.
So I get to be in this world of millionaire lawyers, but I will never be the star that I could potentially be.
Yeah.
You know, and I think, again, would either of us trade places with Nico in a second? Yeah, but to be kind of damned to you're in this world, but you will never succeed.
Yeah, because you're racing in the time of Max Verstappen.
Yeah, he is that journeyman driver who's bounced from constructor to constructor, and he's never really had there's a certain level. I'm sorry, I'm not even finishing the sentence, but there's this level of tragedy to having your identity be wrapped up in your potential if that potential never gets realized.
Yeah,
And
no, that's a
and
good
I
point.
feel like that's where he's gone. So yeah, if he was in a Red Bull car, that would
It
be
would be
so
it would be
interesting.
awesome.
Yeah.
That would be great. And I am happy that Haas is, because Haas, man, they were suspect for years.
Yeah,
And
but
this year they're doing well, but also how do you get past that bias?
Yeah.
I had one of the comments from one of the preseason builds I did. I went heavy Haas, and it was just like, hey, don't go for the constructor because they don't have enough
Sure.
points. But yeah, if you get both of the drivers and they're not costing you points, and they're going to get you some, that's good. And one of the comments was like, really, like you're going heavy Haas, and it's like, yeah,
yeah,
now after we're 3 races in for sure.
you got long-term veterans in the
Yep,
seats,
but
they're
not-
communicating well together. Is it still a Haas car? Yeah,
there
but
you go.
that's if they can climb to mid-tier by the
yeah.
end of the season, that's a victory.
Right. And to keep reminding us, to remind all you out there in TV land, is that 13 of the 20 drivers contracts are up this year.
Is it really
I think so.
13?
It's like half the field. I think it's a little over half the field. I have
Oh,
a
my
list written
goodness.
down somewhere, and I don't know who all. And that is, of course, probably taking into account your Lewis Hamilton, who's already signed with another team and stuff like that. But yeah, it's going to be not all the drivers here this year are going to be here next year.
Yeah, I mean,
There's gonna be
and
big
you've
mix-ups.
perpetually got that next generation of
yeah.
talent knocking on the door. Ollie Behrman's going to be driving
He's
something.
Driving something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, all right, cool. I think that's about it for this episode, since we talked about the race.
Yeah, it's a shorter one. This is good.
So, anything else? Parting shots or saved rounds from you?
If you like what you listen to, please leave us a review. It helps us out with all the algorithms and the internet and all those things. So, thank you.
Absolutely. All right. Cheers.